Hi, listeners.
Hello. Welcome to the MedInsights Unleashed podcast
With your hosts,
Z.
and John.
Hi, John. Good morning. How are you?
Morning, Z. How are you?
I'm good.
Good. It's nice to hear your voice again. What can I
You
say?
too. You know what? I feel it's been a while since we've connected, and it's been some time. It's been a busy summer, right?
It's been a great summer. Very, very busy. Seeing lots of people, doing lots of episodes, and couldn't be more happier.
Great. So, John, today, when you and I were both in Chicago it feels like ages ago, but it was just in June. I was at one of the posters and, ran into this lovely guest that we have right now with us. Her name is Elen. Elen will introduce herself, but she was discussing some data on the challenges in low middle income countries and low income countries and trying to get clinical trials into those sites. And so I stopped to that poster, we started chatting, and we have her in our studio today. So I'm very excited that she is willing to be our guest. So Ellen, I'm going to hand it over to you to introduce yourself to our audience, please.
Thank you so much for inviting me. And it was really nice to meet you at the ASCO, and this is a pleasure for me to be here. So my name is Elen, Medical Oncology Fellow in Armenia, an institution that is called Yeolyan Hematology and Oncology Center. And I'm currently enrolled in a clinical oncology program for the Yerevan State Medical University. I'm also the project coordinator at an institution called Immune Oncology Research Institute. The name is pretty much self-explanatory. It's focused on immune oncology research. And I am the managing editor of OncoDaily.
I was just saying you wear many hats.
Yeah, that's something about coming from middle income country. Well, Armenia is an upper middle income country, and you have limited stuff. There are many people who are willing to do a lot of things, and there is only so many specialized professionals you can find. But it's also a pleasure to do as many things as I am doing because I like to keep it diverse. It's very interesting in that sense. And I also learn from the best who wear many hats.
So, Ellen, I've got a question. Can you just let me and the listeners know what in medical oncology are you specializing in? Is it all tumor types, or is it a specific specialty that you're doing?
It's a specific specialty. It's for solid tumors. So I'm not specializing in hematology. Actually, the systems worldwide, how medical school and how residency and fellowship work, they are different. So currently I am enrolled in a fellowship program that is focused on solid tumors in medical oncology. So it is drugs for solid tumors to treat tumors of organs. During my education, I just wanted to say that we also have rotations for clinical oncology aspects like radiotherapy and surgical oncology. So we do that as well.
Other question, the poster was on income earning. Is there a national health system in Armenia, or is it patient-driven?
You mean for cancer care? Medical
Yes, for the
oncology?
cancer care.
For medical oncology, it is supported by the government, but the support is limited as much as the government can. So financial toxicity is a very real and sad factor that is present in Armenia. So patients have to spend out-of-pocket money to afford their whole treatment. But many aspects of the treatment and diagnosis are covered by the government. As a developing country, I think we are moving forward, but at the same time, you cannot just unsee the real problems that are present today. And financial toxicity is definitely one of them.
It's great that you're on here because we typically get guests from developed countries where, United States, Canada, the European Union, where a lot of the drugs are funded, right? So people get access to timely care. So as a developing country, can you discuss, some of the challenges that you have faced or are facing? And then also from the perspective of the patient, like some of the challenges that you find that on the other side, like for them, that they are facing as well.
Right. So it is true that the challenges are faced not only by patients, but also by doctors too. And as someone who has been from the doctor's perspective in a specialization that is so demanding regarding finances, because cancer care is one not affordable. It's not easy to afford. And I think that's the case for worldwide situation.
Mhm.
And especially with novel therapies, they are very expensive. So for the doctors, regarding financial toxicity, the real challenge is to know that you could have helped the patient, but you won't be helping them because they cannot afford the treatment. And they are just refusing treatment because they cannot afford it. So that's something really heavy on you that you have to deal with.
Yeah.
And it's not rarely that you see that. It's not the case, like, I wouldn't say that that's the dominant situation because still, as I said, government supports. So you are mainly able to give them the standard of care that is standardized by the developed countries. So we follow guidelines from ASCO, ESMO, and NCCN. So we basically treat with international guidelines. And most of the times we are able to adapt them.
Okay.
But there are those situations, and I feel like we more commonly see that than someone from USA would, that patients just refuse treatment because they cannot afford, or patients are not fully diagnosed just because diagnostic tests are too expensive, or some of the diagnostic tests could hint to use more expensive drugs that they later would not be able to afford. So that is difficult from doctor's perspective. Another limiting factor, I would say, could be the limited availability of certain diagnostic approaches or certain facilities that may be comprehensive, the most comprehensive cancer centers have. But I do think that it is not as prominent as the finance. I might be mistaken. This is my the idea that I got throughout my experience, which is very limited compared to those who are not fellows, who are doctors already treating patients.
Okay.
So, but for me right now, that is the prominent thing: patients not being able to afford things. And from patients' perspective, yeah, that's something really heavy. I feel like, and many patients do not always admit that it's the finances at
Of
first.
course. Right.
So they just refuse treatment. And then you get to talk to them and you ask, why are you refusing this? And then you get to the core that is that they are not simply able to afford it. Or in the middle of treatment, they just drop out. They say, this is as much as we can afford, and from now on, we cannot continue.
It's heartbreaking to hear that. Is there a big disparity between city dwellers versus the country?
Well, there is the capital city that is mostly people can afford some kind of treatment. But those coming from villages and more rural areas, they might be coming very late to the clinic because they just keep ignoring symptoms, going to the doctor warrants some costs, and they keep avoiding it, and they come at a point that they are not able to stay home anymore. So that's another great issue, late diagnosis, because people come late to the doctors. But also the situation is different between bigger cities and smaller towns and villages.
What's the percentage of patients that have access to private funds versus, more of the public funding? Like, what's the percentage breakdown? Do you know?
Oh no, I would not be able to give you any number that would be correct, so I would avoid giving you a number. I can just say that the public hospitals are have good quality. So it's not that when they are applying for public support systems, they will get worse treatment than if they were to the private ones. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
in that sense, I couldn't give you a certain number, but I don't like doing this, but if you categorize people to rich and average and poor,
Mhm.
you would have most people falling in the middle category
Middle
rather
class.
than rich. Yeah.
Okay. So majority middle class. Okay.
Yeah. Average income, which is not enough to fully afford cancer care.
Right.
So it's good that we have some kind of support from the government.
Is there any support that's coming from pharma? A lot of pharma companies have programs for patient support to assist with medical cost. Is that in Armenia? Is that something that is common or not?
I won't be able to answer that question because so far I have not gone into the relationships between pharma, the hospitals, and what they cover. What does other sectors cover? What do other sectors cover? I don't know. So I don't know. I honestly don't know that part. But that's something I will be asking tomorrow in the clinic.
Yes, it's something that you should be asking.
Yeah.
Even in the United States, we have copay assistance programs, and we have that throughout Europe too, where the sponsoring pharmaceutical company that manufactures the drug that is, maybe unaffordable to some patients can actually be approached to give patient assistance. And each and every pharmaceutical company has that program. I'm not sure about generic programs, but those that are branded products can actually have an affordability process within them to assist patients, just for your information.
Well, that's great to know. It's interesting. As you were saying that, I just realized that the priorities are pretty different for a medical student, a fellow, and a practicing doctor. I just had that wake up call. I was like, when I was a medical student, for me, the most important thing is why do we have these problems? These need to be fixed without looking into the core things that maybe they're very difficult to address. So I was pretty much a rebel. But now I understand some of whys, and I'm more focused on how I can get in touch with patients and how I can practice the best medicine that I'm learning. But I imagine when I become a practicing doctor, prescribing and everything, I guess those will be the questions in my mind. It's interesting how fast things change and how little we know. Being in like medical school and medical grad education takes a very long time. But some of really important issues that are real world problems are not always introduced to medical students in that sense. You know what I mean? Like,
Yes, definitely.
yeah. So, okay, we learn the books, we learn the science, we learn the clinical practice, we learn how to do a physical exam, but we definitely don't learn that here are some problems that you will be facing that have nothing to do with medicine.
Yeah, I think that's a definite need for a business course to how to run your practice and how to understand what the pharma industry plus the governments are actually doing and can assist.
Yeah.
That is
Mhm.
something that every doctor should have a course in.
Maybe I should do my MPH next.
Maybe OncoDaily may be able to do something about that, Ellen.
Right.
That's something that maybe you can broach on OncoDaily.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. OncoDaily. Yes, it's
Yeah, tell us about your
definitely
role. Tell us about your role with them and how you got connected with them.
right. So OncoDaily is one of the dominant parts of my day and anyone's day who is involved with OncoDaily, because in a year, well, if people, for those who are not familiar, OncoDaily is a media company, a media platform that shares news in oncology. And I am lucky enough to be involved with the team and be the managing editor. And how I came involved with the team is actually a very interesting story, because that's how I came involved with everything that I'm involved right now. And the name of the person who got me involved with everything is Yerevan. He's a pediatric oncologist in Armenia. And I knew him when I was a medical student. I applied for a program that he co-founded in Armenia. It was called Leadership Development and Innovations Academy. Me and my friend applied for it, and we got a full scholarship, and we were lucky enough to sit with these doctors for leadership course for 6 months. And after that, I was in my 5th year, and I was still deciding between professions. What should the specialties? What should I become? Should I be an internist, an ICU doctor, cardiologist, or an oncologist? But my oncology professor, a different person, Dr. Arman, he kind of revolutionized my mindset. He pushed me to oncology.
How did you
Well,
revolutionize your mindset?
like we go to the rotations in med school. And when I went to oncology rotation, there was no way I was considering oncology as a profession, as a specialty. I said, no, I'm not going to be an oncologist. What do? You just know that it's cancer and you just treat cancer. I want to be a doctor who figures out stuff. And and then in 2 weeks, he had such a great influence that for the next 2 years, every single day, I was thinking, maybe I should do oncology. So it's everything. It's starting from how he managed to introduce us the clinical aspect that's present in oncology, medical oncology. It's from how interesting the research is, how open the area is, how many challenges there are. Maybe he saw that I like puzzles and or solving problems. I really liked math and physics in school. So he just kept introducing these challenges that there were in
Right.
oncology, unaddressed issues. And he was like, you can do this, you can do that. For the next 2 years, I considered it. And I found myself going to him and to Dr. Gevorg. And I said, I am interested in oncology. It's either pediatric or adult. So he offered me a job in the Immune Oncology Research Institute. And then I graduated and they offered me a job at OncoDaily. He said, do you want to be in OncoDaily? And I said, yeah, sure. Sounds great. And that's how I got involved with everything.
So they're a company, like a media company, as you just mentioned, that's based out of Armenia, and I'm assuming the majority of the members it's a non-for-profit. Is it a non-for-profit organization?
Immune Oncology Research Institute is, yes, and OncoDaily, it's not based in Armenia. It's actually based in U.S. Boston, but the CEO is Dr. Gevorg.
Okay.
So that's how I got involved. We have a very international team in OncoDaily. We have people from India, from Armenia, from Europe, multiple countries, and US and Canada. So it helps that today we have internet to connect the team. That's for OncoDaily. And for Immune Oncology Research Institute, yeah, it is based in Armenia. And we have different teams. So there is the adult oncology team, the hematology team, and pediatric oncology team. And the research areas are different, obviously. I'm involved in the adult oncology research.
Okay. And can you actually share, now that we're speaking about some of your research, I'm sure John and I mean, we're both intrigued, and then I'm sure that the listeners would also be intrigued and interested about your research. And then also I wanted to find out, how do you actually get more research to come into a country, like a developing country like Armenia? So maybe just, if you could share
Right.
with us.
I can say the complicated things that are important, and I can say really easy things that are commercial, but again, really important. So I will start from the first part. How you get started in research is you have to be very interested, because I don't know anyone from my age, older or younger, that wanted to do research just a little bit and had any success in it. So if you want to do research, you really have to want to do it, and you really have to keep trying. It is easy to learn in a way that information is pretty much available on the internet, so you can access anything you want. But
Right.
to do it efficiently, you have to find mentors, because I don't imagine doing any of what I have done and I keep doing if I did not have my mentors, because they just make everything much easier and they just put you on the right direction, but they don't tell you how many steps to take. That's the great thing about mentors. They show you the way and they say, figure out the rest yourself. And in a way, that work really pays at the end. So you appreciate the way you came. So for me, I was interested in research always since I remember myself. So oncology was, again, in that area, very soothing. But like if a year ago, when I was applying for fellowship, if you told me that in less than 6 months I will be presenting at ASCO, I would not believe you, and I would think that it's just nice words that you are saying. But again, Dr. Gevork and another mentor of mine, Dr. Sanval, pushed me, and they said, of course, you have to do something. And they hinted on the idea. They helped me focus on something. And I did the rest with, of course, some of my colleagues and fellows. And then next thing I know, I'm the first person from Armenia to have a poster and an oral presentation at ASCO. That
Can you
was a real.
Sorry, can you elaborate? Can you go into some of the details of your specific research?
Yeah. So it's global disparities in immunotherapy clinical trials, a comprehensive analysis of low and middle income countries over the past decade. So basically, an easy version to put out there is that I went on clinicaltrials.gov, which is the largest clinical trials database to our knowledge. Of course, there are some national clinical trials websites for each country, but many also submit their trials in clinicaltrials.gov. So I went there and I searched for cancer immunotherapy clinical trials, which means that immunotherapy drugs that were being tried for cancer for the past decade. And my goal was to find where low and middle income countries involved in those trials. And the results were very striking because it turned out that no low-income country was involved in any clinical trial that was utilizing an immunotherapy agent. Like most of the African countries were not enrolled in any immunotherapy clinical trials.
What was your
And then,
what was your definition of, like, what was the cutoff, or how would one define a low income country versus a low middle income country? What's the definition cutoff?
right. So the cutoff is decided by the World Bank. They give a list every year and they update it. It's the income, countries share their income, and then it's an economic classification, which in many cases, of course, is not very accurate because to make some sense of it. So, for example, China is an upper middle income country, and so is Armenia. So those are two countries that you cannot compare with their income and with their economic status. Obviously, China has much more income than Armenia, but they both are in the same group. So in this sense, it is very relevant what you call an upper middle income country and what you call a low income country. But in a sense that this is the most prominent way that most people use to categorize countries based on their financial level, you for science, you have to use it. So you can't just say, you know what, no, China makes more, so maybe I'm going to count them as a high income country. That's why in my research, I specified the sections where some countries were outliers in their groups.
In the outlying countries, is South Africa, for example, are these countries even more in a desperate situation from a treatment of cancer therapy and even access to generic drugs for treatment versus a middle country?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. Some part of it I cannot answer, but the second part of it I can hypothesize about. So do they have access to generic drugs? I cannot say because I have not been there. I have not seen there what is happening there, but I can find some research that shows what they have. But I do hypothesize that yes, the countries that do not have access to clinical trials, maybe they do not shine with having access to generic drugs. But I can answer for clinical trials part of the view. The answer is yes. For example, there were only 8 lower middle income countries involved in clinical immunotherapy clinical trials in cancer. And to understand what that means is, in the world, there are 54 lower middle income countries. And out of those 54, only 8 were involved in these trials during the past 10 years. It's not just 1 year. So, and in those 8, during those past years, Ukraine had the most trials. And to compare that with Eswatini, an African country, formerly known as Swaziland, they only had 1 in 10 years. Ukraine had 16. So it does matter.
So did you go into the final, kind of the next step to better understand, like, why is there such that disparity? So out of the 54 lower middle income countries, why is it only 8 have access? But yet even that number is low. Like, why is the access to these low middle income countries for clinical trials so low?
Yeah, so currently I'm turning this abstract into a paper, but I think I'm going to do a separate work on that one. I have had the chance to talk to some healthcare leaders and to ask them this question. And what I find is that is the most prominent is the accessibility of facilities and the healthcare structure that is needed to conduct clinical trials there. But that is not an absolute reason to exclude countries from clinical trials, because many countries can develop that even if they don't have it. They can build the facility, they can have the healthcare infrastructure, they can have people trained and do the trial. Something else is the population. So, cervical cancer, which countries do you choose to do a clinical trial there? You choose those that have high incidence of cervical cancer. You don't choose those that maybe see very few cases a year. And that's also, and for example, that is a prominent issue in Armenia, right? But if we were to do a phase 3 trial or phase 4 trial immediately, it would imply that we need high incidence so that we could enroll patients in a short amount of time. Otherwise, we would need many years to meet the sample size. But we have a small population, nearly 3 million people. So you don't see that many cases that phase 4 trial or phase 3 trial would need, right? But it is not impossible. What I'm saying is that there is always a way around. And one of the ways is to be involved in a clinical trial that is multicentric and is going in multiple countries.
Do you think the other challenge is, and this is some of the other work that I'm also doing, is a lack of, I guess, awareness from pharmaceutical companies as well, so that they're made aware that, to your point, there are certain countries with the facilities made available to run right from phase 1 right up to phase 3 trials. The lack of, 1, awareness, and 2, the willingness from the pharmaceutical companies. Do you have any comment to that?
Sure, I think that could also be a reason why not, because pharmaceutical companies want to do their trials in places that later they will get approval for.
Right.
Right. So if they go and pick a country that their drug is not going to get an approval there, or even if it is, as I said, it's not going to be as useful or as utilized as it would be in a high-income country with a bigger population.
Right.
And the way the world currently works, from what I see, from my very limited perspective, is that we do follow the leading forces in healthcare. For example, if drug, like being in Armenia, we use the NCCN guidelines and we adapt it to our settings, right? We do not have something that is called a national guideline for all cancers. We are developing some. But again, we trust the NCCN guidelines coming from USA. And we trust the ESMO guidelines, and we trust the ASCO guidelines. And I can say that the same situation is worldwide. So leading healthcare systems direct the way. And it's not a bad thing. It's a great thing because they already have done the research. We can just follow. But if we were to develop a guideline and change it the next year, I don't know if USA would follow the Armenian guideline for multiple reasons. And it's okay, and it's good that they wouldn't follow, because Armenian population is Armenians mostly.
Right. Yeah.
So if a drug works here, if a guideline works here, it doesn't mean that it's gonna work in US.
But I think that's a very important point that you make, is there's also the genetic disposition of patients that needs to be taken into account. So to your point, when you're running clinical trials, a certain drug or standard of care that may work for a Western patient population may not necessarily have the same metabolic effect from the PK, from the PD, pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics. For example, for patients in Africa, right? Like genetically, their makeup is different. So I think that
Yes.
drugs need to be tested in those patients.
That's exactly why clinical trials, my research is focused on clinical trials. So how else do you test your hypotheses, or if a drug works or not? You have to do a clinical trial there.
I think the other big issue in the room is that these sites have to meet the scrutiny of the FDA and European regulatory authorities from a clinical trial perspective, and the CROs, the clinical report forms that are associated with those trials, they all have to meet a high standard. I mean, that's another big issue, I would believe, in the decision-making from a pharmaceutical company to ensure that the trial and expense that they're pouring into that center is going to meet the rigor from an FDA inspection, right? And ensure the quality of the trial is meeting worldwide standards.
Yes, and very big issue, because when a clinical trial's result is being published and you are following it, you want to be sure that it's ethical, it's precise, you can trust it. And I think if I were to do this research 5 years ago, the situation would be much, much worse than that I've done now, because in the past 5 years, involvement of countries in clinical trials, in immunotherapy clinical trials, has been 2 or 3 times more than in the first 5 years of that decade. And the experience is the same for Armenia as well. In the past 2-3 years with the Immune Oncology Research Institute, we've been able to initiate multiple clinical trials. And currently, we do have ongoing clinical trials, which I'm lucky enough to be a part of and maybe making history. And this is something that is important. And I think it's very inspiring also for other middle-income countries to have the initiative, or at least to try and take the initiative to be part of something.
Can you share some of the successes, or like how your country managed to get some of these trials in? Because I think, again, I mean, our podcast is international, and, we're hoping that this will reach others around the world and it could help inspire them to make some, positive changes.
That would be a great question for the CEO and Chief Scientific Director of the Immune Oncology Research Institute, because they basically started everything. But from what I know is that we got the certifications, we got the training. So we first had a trained staff. And I myself, taking some part in the clinical trial, have undergone some treatment, the ASO treatment. That treatment is about everything, isn't it, after a clinic day? So, no, I have undergone some training. So that's one thing. Second, you have to have the facilities,
right,
to do the clinical trial. So you have to build all of those things. And third, you have to have I don't think it's a secret, because mainly if pharma does a clinical trial, they are going to do investigator-initiated ones. So you have to have a good clinical trial that you introduce to the pharma, and they will say, we can do this. So we had our clinical trials are investigator-initiated. So that's, I feel like, is another big component of how we got it.
And congratulations on that. That is exceedingly very difficult to do, and to get that trial or trials approved is amazing. So that's
Thank
a
you.
kudos to you and your team.
I think John, Elen kind of mentioned that we may need to have a conversation with her CEO to better understand how they've had these successes in bringing trials into a country like Armenia. And again, an opportunity to share best practices with other countries around the world. Could be a future episode.
Yeah, I would love to hear the episode myself. It's actually the thing about our team is that, and what you learn from them is that they act very fast and they are very efficient. And that's the same attitude that, as I mentioned with OncoDaily, in a year it has grown massively. It only has 1 year history, but currently among the healthcare media companies and media outlets, OncoDaily is leading 10 times more than the other ones. So it's competing with BBC and CNN with engagement on LinkedIn, just to give a situation of what's happening. And that's been in a year. So I think the most amazing thing that I have taken from this team is that you just have to have something in mind. You have to have a goal and pursue it as fast right now. There is no tomorrow. There is no maybe next week. It's just now. And that always gives the result.
It's a great way to finish this episode. Ellen, it's been fantastic talking to you. And again, congratulations on the ASCO poster presentation. That in itself was a major feat. And when you consider that ASCO reviews over 7,000 abstracts for its selection, and for you to actually be selected is an amazing feat. So it's kudos again to you guys in Armenia at your hospital.
Yeah. And Ellen, just to echo some of the comments that John just made, congratulations. I think that I'd be more interested now to see what your paper looks like and what your kind of next steps are with regards to the research. Because I think what you're doing is so imperative, as those low, middle income and low income countries really need to get more clinical trials. There needs to be more diversity. Diversity is really important. And I know that's part of the FDA's mandate for DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So congratulations. And even on your work in Armenia, being a fellow again, you have some significant challenges, but you are definitely surrounded by a very strong team, right? Which makes a big difference.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for the kind words and for the invitation. I mean, yes, if I wasn't selected for ASCO presentation, I would not have met you.
That's true.
It's win-win. Thank
Yeah.
you for the kind words. Thank you for the invitation. And as you said, yes, I'm surrounded by a very great team, and I'm lucky enough to be among them. And I think for fellows, for trainees, that is an important thing, to find the right people to follow and to have good mentors who will guide them correctly. But also you gotta work and you gotta want to work. So no matter how much guidance there is, if you don't have that in mind, it's gonna go to waste. So I hope next time we meet, I will have more to share on these clinical trials and on the disparities, and I hope there will be much more of a good information than the bad one.
Looking forward to it.
All right.
Well,
Thank you very much.
thank you, Ellen. And John,
Thank
as
you.
always, it's been fun.
It's been great. And thank you, Ellen, for her contribution to MedInsights Unleashed this morning. It's been really fantastic. And thank you to the listeners out there. And just remember also, there's OncoDaily. We'd like to put a plug in for OncoDaily. I was just going through their website. They have some fantastic doctors that are esteemed throughout the world. Amazing people. I know them personally. And it's just such a great platform. Thank you very much.
Great. Okay, until the next time. Thanks, everyone. Ciao, ciao.
Ciao, ciao. MedInsights Unleashed disclaimers. This podcast is for general information purposes only and should not be considered healthcare advice in any way. The podcast is not intended to replace professional medical advice. The use of the information and material linked to the podcast is at the user's own risk. MedInsights Unleashed is not responsible for any losses, damages, or liabilities that may arise from the use of the podcast. Importantly, please consult your healthcare provider for individualized guidance and treatment. Thank you, and we look forward to you being with us on the next MedInsights Unleashed podcast.